This summer, I was focused on temporary protected status here in the U.S. I worked with the Law School Center on Race and Equality in the Law. The center itself kind of does a wide array of different projects. It funds different research groups, facilitates discussions about issues of race in the law, and within the media, or in my case, within immigration work and within current policies. My project kind of began with an interest in historical anti-Black immigration policies that was directed towards Haitians throughout the 1960s to the 1990s, and how this might be seen as to be repeated today with the termination of temporary protected status. Temporary protected status itself was a designation that I'll give the proper definition from the UCIS later, but essentially it's temporary immigration status that was given to several countries that's been terminated within the past year by the Trump administration. My plan for the summer was generally to work within the Haitian community here in New York, doing interviews with prominent members here, and a lot of research on possible legal ramifications of TPS and possible solutions to the issue at hand. So TPS itself was originally created in 1990 as part of the Immigration Act of 1990, and it is defined on the Immigration Services website as given due to conditions in the country that temporarily prevent the country's nationals from returning safely, or in certain circumstances where the country is unable to handle the return of nationals adequately, for the following reasons: ongoing armed conflict, an environmental disaster, or other extraordinary and temporary conditions. Generally, this has been given for natural disasters in the aftermath of them. The three biggest designations are to Haiti, El Salvador, and Honduras, which is listed up here. They've all had it for quite some time and represent very large populations. It's important to note that the recipient numbers do not include the extended families that many of them have here that would also be forced to return with the termination. So you're looking at upwards of 400,000 people who are supposed to be returned. These are also all situated in very long histories of U.S. interventionist policies, both militaristically and policy-wise, in combination with immigration policies that discriminated against all three of these groups as they tried to come to the U.S. Most of these policies happened during the Cold War, but went up until the 1990s. In Haiti specifically, there was two major regimes that were big human rights violators: the Duvalier regimes, which is known as colloquially as Papa Doc and Baby Doc regimes, both of which were propped up by the U.S. government in multiple ways, and at the same time, the U.S. government systematically turned away Haitian refugees when they arrived in the U.S. And generally, there was at that time, there was often a pushback against refugees that were from non-communist countries, even though that they were under dictatorships as long as they were right-wing. But particularly with Haiti, it's clear to see there is some anti-Black discrimination. A lot of this can be evidenced by some interactions that happened between U.S. immigration forces and Cubans versus U.S. immigration forces and Haitians. One such example was a boat of roughly 200 Haitians picked up two Cuban immigrants on the way, Cuban refugees on the way, and when they arrived in the U.S., all of the Haitians were returned and the two Cubans were allowed to stay. These are the major human rights issues that I was kind of looking at over the summer, which involved a mix between both international and national rights. The main one were the rights of immigrants and refugees, and then upon arrival, there's rights to due process and equal protection, as well as in deportation proceedings. Discrimination, again, based on race, ethnicity, and or national origin, a right against that. And then my kind of question for the summer as well, and revolved all around whether or not there should be a right to not be returned to deeply unsafe conditions, which in some ways exists, but in many ways has not really been implemented. Haiti itself does not recovered from the earthquake, which gave it its original designation. The earthquake in 2010 decimated the main city, Port-au-Prince, as well as most of the country. Since then, there's been a cholera epidemic as a result of UN peacekeeping forces, and several hurricanes, as well as food shortages and many other environmental issues that have continued to hold it back from recovering fully from the earthquake. So the economy, the infrastructure, and the government are simply not capable of accepting the large amount of returnees that would be brought back by the termination of TPS. The U.S. State Department's report in 2016 and the report made by the Human Rights Watch both reflect these, which means that the U.S.'s own State Department acknowledges that Haiti both structurally cannot handle it and is still facing within the country human rights abuses of both the political and civil nature, particularly within the military and police, which oftentimes do violate those rights rampantly, and socioeconomic issues, as well as in terms of lack of access to healthcare, food, education, and other basic necessities. In contrast to this, somehow the State Department it was still decided that TPS would be terminated in contradiction to its own report. GAR is an NGO, a local NGO in Haiti. Most of the work they do is with returnees. Currently, most of those returnees are back from the Dominican Republic, because the Dominican Republic itself is involved in a heavily racially discriminatory process in which it's deporting many Haitian nationals and or the descendants of Haitian nationals who have moved to the Dominican Republic for economic opportunity. So GAR basically fills in the entirety of what should be done by a government agency without any government funding. In fact, many refugees or returnees that go to the government for help are actually directed to GAR services, even though the government doesn't give them any money. They fill in all of the gaps for, helping people to readjust by providing them education classes, helping them seek employment, housing, and providing basic coverage of those services in the interim until they're able to provide it for themselves. Currently, GAR is doing really wonderful work, but is not in any way able to take in the 46,000 people that would come back, plus their families. They are already struggling, and the amount of funding and the amount of money and workload that would be required of such a large group would not be able to be filled by them, and there's no government ability to take over that kind of work currently. My own work for the summer was focused on researching the history of discrimination towards Haitians historically. I limited myself to 1960s onward here in the U.S., but it goes back since the actual founding of Haiti. And this involved interviewing Haitian community members here in the U.S., both to talk about this history and also to talk about the needs and wants of the community in terms of TPS. What were they looking for? What did they want to get out of this? Talking to lawyers who are currently working on court cases that are trying to stop the termination of TPS and get it reversed, or at the very least get it re-examined. Many of these, there's a couple different types of court cases running within this. Some of them are focusing on just getting TPS, saying that it should never have been terminated in the first place. A lot of it is based on discriminatory tactics, claiming that the administration is doing it because of discrimination based on race, ethnicity, and or national origin, which could be evidenced by many of the administration's own information given out in statements in which they've referred to these countries very poorly, to say the least. I also went to a new Sanctuary Coalition meeting, which met with several other NGOs as they worked on these types of projects surrounding TPS, and an extensive look into all of these court cases as well. My end result is culminating in a report that the center plans to publish. I'm currently editing it as well. In my own reflections here, there's a lot of major setbacks for me over the summer, particularly in July. I had planned a trip to go to Haiti myself and work with GAR, going to the border and talking with returnees and other members there, which I still did some of over email, but unfortunately there was major protests in Haiti that shut down pretty much all of Port-au-Prince, and my flights were canceled and I was unable to go anymore because it was going to take such a long time for them to recover and for GAR to be ready for me to come. This ironically does provide great evidence for why Haiti really couldn't handle the return of thousands of people, but did present a setback in my own work. Additionally, Trump gave out an executive order that prevented a plan that the New Sanctuary Coalition had put together. The order meant that anyone who applies for any type of immigration change in their status and is denied will immediately be put into deportation proceedings and not be given an opportunity to change that beforehand. So this changed some of the plans that we had to work with the city council for alternative actions. Regardless, I moved forward and I started looking at other alternatives, and in my report have made other recommendations for how to move forward looking into specifically like legal loopholes that were available. Essentially, I feel like the motto that I think most of us who did this work over the summer is hope for the best, but prepare for the worst when you do human rights work, especially in today's climate. Not really much of another choice. And it also taught me some usefulness in terms of what the court systems can provide, because although many of these cases are currently doing great stalling tactics, because many of these judges are agreeing that these are unlawful, you can't terminate TPS and you need to keep it for as long as possible, and it gives people an extended time period to apply for permanent residency status if that's an option for them. They also, when they hit the Supreme Court, are very unlikely to win in the long term, but it still stalls for long enough to help people. So it's very important to still remember that even if you can't win at the highest level, it doesn't mean you shouldn't try. As for the actual usefulness of human rights framework, so you're supposed to have rights to due process, equal protection, and equal treatment. Oftentimes, immigrants' quote ability / option to leave a country is used against them in denial of due process rights, among other things. There's a lot of caveats there for non-citizens that exist. The definitions for refugees requires that you're fleeing persecution based on race, gender, etc., which is very limiting for people who are fleeing just generally violent and very unsafe conditions that they shouldn't be forced to return to, and should be allowed to claim refugee based on that. And as well as the non-refoulement policy, which basically says that you can't return asylum seekers unless if you know that there's going to be harm come to them when they return or they'll be persecuted. Unfortunately, the U.S. courts say that unless the asylum seeker reaches U.S. soil, this doesn't count, which means they can turn away anyone in international waters, which is what happened throughout the 90s to Haitian asylum seekers. But clearly, the U.S. courts have disregarded many of the recommendations made by international human rights organizations that have set out these rules, saying that non-refoulement policies do in fact apply to international waters. So there's a mixed message there between what is actually being said with the international human rights community and what comes into play in reality in U.S. courts. And additionally, all of these laws offer very little in terms of protections from deportations that are based in policies that are really based in political goals or discrimination that are not based on any real immigration aims or any legalities, but there need to be a lot more protections for people under this. For me, after this project, my next steps are going to be finishing up this report, as well as looking and keeping involved with the center on this project and other organizations that I've connected to on this project over the summer, and then law school. And I know I just really trashed the law, but still gonna do it. So thank you to Gallatin and the Human Rights Commission for this. I've had a wonderful summer. Thank you.